Hello and welcome to my project. So I'm making a video showing all the steps of my independent project this semester, and the project that I chose was to follow this main source called Navajo native dyes, and it was written in the 1940s, and the main formulations were created by Nonaba G. Bryan, who is a Navajo master weaver rug maker. So when I found that, I got really excited because I love fiber arts and specifically knitting. So I'm just going to take you through the steps of my project. The first phase is to prepare the fiber that I have. The second phase is to dye it. And the third phase is to knit it into a sweater. I went with wool, which is what Navajo people would be using, and what is in the source. But this is superwash wool, which basically means it won't felt when it's heated up, which is great because in some of the recipes in the dye baths, you have to boil the wool for a long time. The first step I have to do is take it from balls and wind it into skeins, which is like a giant loop of yarn, and that will make it easier to dye and let the dyes penetrate through it. One thing that's cool about fiber arts that I think about a lot is that it involves a lot of waiting around. You'll see when I get to the dyeing portion of this project, I have to boil things for a long time. I have to let them dry. There's a lot of waiting baked in, and even during knitting, you're sitting, you have access to your mind, you have access to your thoughts and communication, but not really access to moving your body around that much because you kind of have to sit and do fine work. It always makes me think about the kind of inter-community connection that happened while women were doing that work, and sharing news, sharing gossip, sharing stories. And that's what I still do today. I knit all day with my nanny kid at work, and he's interested in my projects, and caregiving can be hard, but for me it actually eases caregiving, and to feel a little bit productive and have something that's just your own that you can do while a kid is demanding every other second of your life. Hello! So today I'm outside in my backyard. The next step in my process is to scour the skeins, aka to wash them. Navajo people would go ahead and spin the yarn straight from the sheep, not washing the fleece at all, and then they would wash it after spinning. With commercial yarns, I definitely don't have to do this step, but it's kind of interesting. So the traditional ingredient that was used for this is called yucca glauca. It's the root of a yucca plant. It's also called soapweed. And the reason for that is because when you dig up the root, it kind of looks like a potato, and you lather it up, it has saponins in it, and it can clean, and it's a natural soap. I sourced some from Etsy, and it's dried, which I was worried about, but in the source text that I'm following, they say that you can dry it. So I'm gonna try to follow the steps listed and see if we can get any soap for our yarn. Navajo word in the Bryan text given for yucca glauca is tis asadi dis ooze. So I have 1 quart of cold water here. It says rub the crushed fruits between the hands in cold water until there is a heavy lather.
That's what I'm gonna try. We'll see if it works here. Get any kind of soap in it. Oh my gosh, you guys, it's totally working. I don't know if you can see this.
Do you see that? Oh my gosh, I'm so excited that it worked. One thing that I was noticing as I was reading this text is that this process is so intensive. You need gallons of water, you need hot water, so you need to tend a fire, you need to raise the sheep and harvest the wool, you need to spin that wool. But even just the dyeing process alone, discounting getting the wool, is crazy. Okay, this is really exciting. I feel like it's working very well. That's amazing. What a cool thing to have happen. It got pretty lathery, I have to say. What does it smell like, you ask? It smells like wood chips in water. I am so impressed. It's kind of fun. My yarn is washed. It's been rinsed twice, and before I let it dry, I'm gonna go on to the next step, which is mordanting. Mordanting fiber is something that you do when you use natural dyes, and what it is chemically treating a fiber so that the dye molecules can penetrate deeper and stay in. It can also create brighter colors. And what's so interesting is the mordant that's used in the source text is the same one that most people still use today. It's called alum, or I have aluminum potassium sulfate. It's the same thing. Now it just comes in a little baggie from online. It looks like sugar. It's not edible. And please, 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 if you're using alum, even natural dyes, especially commercial dyes, don't use anything coming in contact with food on them because it can make you very sick. The Navajo word for alum given in the book is seco. A lot of the dye recipes say just throw in a chunk. Doesn't specify how much. Alum was found under large rocks where water has evaporated. So I'm gonna follow the instructions that came with this. 1.5 teaspoon boil for I think an hour. Let the dye pot cool on its own, and then I'm gonna hang the yarn and let it dry. That also reminds me a lot of Buffalo Bird Woman's Garden, where the built-in waiting, only harvesting every 4 days, having rest days or other days to do different types of tasks. That's really relevant for my life because I don't have time to dye yarn every day because I have a million things to do, kind of like Buffalo Bird Woman. Things are meant to take a long time. Here we are on the journey following the book. We did all of the steps of preparing the fiber. Now we're into this next part of dyeing the fiber. So on my stove, I have this top. I'm going to add my dye stuff to it, and we'll get to see what the color of the dye bath will be. I'm not really looking forward to heating up my house and adding so much humidity. I actually kind of wish I did have a fire to cook this over right now. Firstly, I'm going to talk about the cochineal bugs. These are a really interesting species of bugs. They lived on prickly pear and a lot of cactus. They are indigenous to the South Americas and the Middle Americas, like southwest of what is now the USA, discovered by white people during the Aztec reign, and they became incredibly valuable because red dyes in Europe were very expensive to produce. They became second in value only to gold, and they became so expensive that indigenous people of the Americas could not afford to even use them. So how did the Navajo get their iconic red color in their blankets and their rugs? The Spanish took the bugs back to Europe, largely in Britain, to dye their textiles. And when the Navajo started really struggling, like when they were kicked off their ancestral lands, the Spanish had to start supplying things to them. So they started giving them textiles and giving them fabrics. A lot of the fabrics were actually dyed red from the cochineal bugs that were from the Navajo native lands. And what the ingenious people did is they unpicked and unwove those fabrics and rewove them back into rugs. So it's kind of interesting that it's a native ingredient, but they actually did not have access to it until it traveled to Europe and back to them. Another interesting thing is these are also known as carmine, which is in a lot of foods and a lot of cosmetics. A lot of red lipstick is made with carmine, so it's still a really popular ingredient to this day. Second ingredient we're going to be using to dye today are these juniper berries. I gathered them from Spice World on Amazon. You can find them a lot around here because people have planted juniper trees. Not just the berries were used to dye, a lot of times the bark and the boughs were used to dye. The Navajo word for juniper is gad. And I added all 400 grams to some water and I've soaked it overnight. We're going to be doing 5 skeins of yarn, so 250 grams in there. It's supposed to turn out sort of like an orange tan, but I've also seen pictures of it going a little green, so it's kind of a mystery of what it's going to look like. The Navajo called walnut ha-alt-sed, and it would be collected for food and collected for dye stuff. This yarn is actually not from the type of breed of sheep that the Navajo would have used. The Navajo, or as they called themselves, the Dene, they used a breed of sheep called the Churro that Spaniards brought over when they came to the Americas. And the churro have a really long staple length, so the fibers in their coat are very long, making them easy to spin by hand. The other feature about them is they are not very oily, not very waxy, which helped keep their fleece really clean, which is why we did the washing step of the yarn after it was spun the same way the Navajo would have done, because they didn't have to scour and wash the fleece. They would spin it first and just give it a final washing. So when the Spaniards kicked the Navajo off of their ancestral lands in the 1860s. They went on something called the Long Walk. Hundreds of Navajo people died. And when they were moved to their reservation, they didn't have access to the same churro sheep that they had been using for generations and generations. So the Spaniards kind of gave them a different breed of sheep, but the staple length of the fleece was much shorter, making it very hard to spin. And they were also a very oily variety, so they couldn't use any of their traditional methods. And this actually lowered the quality of the fiber arts. When the Navajo were producing a lower quality fiber arts because they didn't have access to their original materials, what happened was a lot of European American companies actually stole their designs and started producing really high quality blankets to sell to white settlers because they became highly prized, and they usurped that art from the Navajo, which is so sad. It kind of shows how it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of you take away the material and then you can blame the tribe for a lower quality and justify stealing their art to make money from it. We've done preparing the fiber, we've done dyeing the fiber, and now we're moving on to knitting the fiber. I'm so excited to show you the results of our dye, the juniper berry. It turned out this beautiful yellowish tan. I'm so happy with it. Dyeing with the junipers was super fun because it made my house smell really woodsy and piney. The walnut. So this one turned out nice and dark. It'll be a great contrast color between the juniper and the walnut. The cochineal bugs, they turned out this beautiful, gorgeous red color. I'm so impressed with how even and vibrant the dyes turned out. And I think these colors will look beautiful along with our undyed skein. I am excited to use some of the natural colored yarn because in the original source text, they have a whole section on creating colors by just blending the wool as it would have come from the sheep. So the pattern I chose to make is called Rodeo Sweater. It's created by a modern Navajo artist, and she creates a lot of knitwear inspired from her heritage and from her childhood growing up. She created the sweater because it reminds her of being at the rodeo when she was a kid, and it gives a really strong southwestern vibe. She also says that the Navajo word for rodeo is na-ahuhai, which means chicken. At the Navajo rodeos, they would bury a chicken and have two people on horseback trying to get it out, and whoever got it out first would be the victor. So that's why the Navajo word means chicken for rodeo. Now the fun part starts. I get to knit. I am first gonna wind up all my yarn, and then I'll get to knitting it. In the Navajo creation story, Spider-Woman lived in the third world. The Holy Ones advised her that she had the capabilities of weaving a map of the universe and the geometrical patterns of spirit beings in the night sky. On a beautiful day when she was out on the land exploring and gathering food, she came upon a small young tree. She touched it with her right hand and wrapped her fingers around one of its branches. As she was letting go, a string streamed out of the center of her palm and wrapped around the tree branch. She was not quite sure what the string was. At first, she shook her hand to release the string, but it would not break free. She thought if she kept wrapping the string around the branch, it might let go. At this particular moment, she knew that this was the weaving the holy people instructed her to do. Immediately, she broke the string with her left hand without hesitation. She sat and thought carefully about how to use her new gift. For the rest of the day, she sat close to the tree and wrapped the string into various patterns on other branches of the small tree. Danae of today live in the fourth world, known as the glittering world. Young weavers are instructed to find a spider web in the early morning, glistening with sunlight and sparkles. They are told to place the palm of their right hand upon the spider's webbing without destroying or damaging the web. At that moment, Spider-Woman's gift of weaving enters the young weaver's spirit, where it lives forever. I want to mention one more thing about this pattern, which is so cool, is that it's size inclusive. A lot of knitting patterns aren't, and I just really appreciate that this one is. I'm gonna start with my main color, which is the juniper yarn, and I'm gonna start with the US 6 needles. This is worked top down, so it starts with the neckband and then down, and then the sleeves last. If you're a knitter, you're probably saying, Rose, what about your gauge swatch? What did your gauge swatch tell you? I say, where's your sense of mystery and adventure? Okay, we're just jumping right in. We're gonna see if it works. I finished the neckband. Here's what it's looking like now. I'm going to switch to the larger needles and do some German short rows. It's about a week since I've been knitting on this project, and let me show you where I'm at. I have just finished the color work chart. I'm so happy with how it turned out. I love the contrast we were able to get with those natural dyes. What I have to do is complete knitting the body, and then I'm gonna add the short little sleeves on. While I was knitting on this, it made me think about how with work and with crafts, you were limited by daylight when you didn't have unnatural light to go by at night. It makes me think about all the times when I've been knitting, staying up late at night with my lamp on, straining my eyes, overworking myself, you know, making mistakes that I wouldn't normally make because I wasn't tired. And it's kind of an interesting and sort of unheard of idea in this day and age to put something down intentionally. Forced breaks, I think, could be very healthy, especially when you're doing such intricate, detailed work like fiber arts. And will I try that? Maybe. I feel like because we work during the day, a lot of us, we're kind of forced to push our hobbies and our artwork to nighttime. So, you know, our society doesn't really support that. So there's actually a really cool way to represent Indigenous knowledge and innovation in one medium, which would be a die chart, which has in the center a little sample woven piece, and then connected to it are all the strings of yarn going to their natural source. So like we would have juniper, we would have walnut, and I found one that was made in 2019 by Rosalind Washburn, and she actually credits the same source text, Navajo native dyes, their preparation and use, that we use to make some of our dye recipes, which is really cool. Navajo dye charts were begun in the 1950s by Mabel Burnside Myers, who was a Dene herbalist from Arizona. She created dye charts to first teach students of dyeing and students of weaving, and eventually they were created for a tourist market. So dye charts became both objects of Indigenous knowledge and innovation and consumption, just like the rugs and blankets that we've been studying through this project. And speaking of rugs and blankets, I found the original saddle blanket that this design is actually based on. It's in storage at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's dated to the 1860s or 70s. They think it's from Arizona or New Mexico. It's woven out of wool, which fits with all of our prior knowledge and matches with our project that we made. The original saddle blanket has a really dark, rich black. It has sort of a tannish and then like a cream color, and then a blue, which I believe to be indigo. But even if we look at the dye chart, we can kind of identify, you know, they might have used sumac leaf for the dark color. The lighter color might have been a natural wool color. And then even the tan color, it could have been juniper. It's really close to what we made here. I'm sure the saddle pad is getting taken care of very well by the curators and the people who care for the collections at the Met, but it does make me think about when we learned about cordage and basketry. Multiple people talked about how you have to use the baskets, and the baskets have a soul, and when they're put away, hidden away, they die. That's exactly how I feel as a fiber artist. When you're wearing your items and you're caring for them, you're washing them, you're mending them, that's when they're alive and they're taking on life, and they can last pretty much indefinitely, forever. But if you put them away in a bin and never look at them, never think about them again, that's when the moths might come infest them, or they might get dry rotted. It does make me kind of sad that there's so many artifacts hidden behind the walls of museums. And it also makes me wonder who made them, because the 60s and 70s were actually not that long ago, 150 years ago. Think about the descendants of the people who made them and if they even know that they're connected to these gorgeous pieces. And I definitely feel connected to it now after copying the pattern and learning about the dye sources. It's been such an interesting lens to look at Navajo history and Navajo culture through.